Boys here, we appreciate you being here. Okay, we are continuing on our study of Ephesians. We're in Ephesians chapter 4 at the moment. The overall title I would give the book of Ephesians is Life in Christ. Commonly you'll hear just the church, but I think more accurately it's Life in Christ. Chapter 4 in particular is Conduct Expected of Members of the Church. And we've had a couple of lessons already. I may have another couple on this particular paragraph that I'm working in, and then we'll carry on with the chapter. So I'll just read the section of the chapter we're working in at the moment. It's verses 1 through 6. Therefore, I, the prisoner of the Lord, exhort you to live in a manner worthy of the calling with which you were called, with all humility and gentleness, with patience, putting up with one another in love, being eager to keep the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. One body and one Spirit, you were called with one hope of your calling, one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who is over all and through all and in all. We've been through verses 1 and 2 up till now, and there the type of conduct we're asked to produce is humility, gentleness, and patience. And the putting up with one another in love is, I think, a comment on the patience. We're going to need to do that. And as we get into this lesson, we may see a little more how that's the case. We are all different people. We all have our own likes, dislikes. I'm not expecting everyone to like me. I think most of you love me. But there might be the odd one that doesn't love me, you know. But you've got to put up with me, that's the point. Putting up with one another in love. Doesn't matter what we think of each other as a person. If we're trying to be faithful as a Christian, we have to put up with each other. That's just what God expects from us. Okay, the section we're going to look at today is from verse 3 through to verse 6, being eager to keep the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. And then he lists out, if you like, the reasons why we should be able to maintain unity. There is only one body. There is only one Spirit. There is only one hope. There is only one Lord. There's only one faith. There's only one baptism, and there's only one Father. I know in the religious world today we have some thousands of different religious groups that have their own entity in terms of an organisation which is different from another group's organisation. I guess you could say the Church of Christ is thousands and thousands of different groups, but that's not what I'm meaning. Our organisation is that we are autonomous groups, and we do it because that's what the Bible says. But then you have other groups which are, in a sense, unified by a leader, a head office, a different set of manuscripts that they follow, if you like, and various other reasons. So in terms of the number of groups that maybe call themselves Christians but have a different structure from each other, there's over 3,000 of those. And yet this passage, which supposedly all of our Christianity is based on, calls for unity. Now, before I get into that, I just want to make a comment on these ones. When I looked at this passage, it looks pretty much the same. One. They're all spelled the same. But if you look at the Greek, there's actually, I think, 3 different words there. They all mean one, but they are all very slightly different. In English, we don't put words as masculine, feminine, or neuter. They're all just words for us. There are very few. A shepherdess. Sometimes we put S on the end to denote feminine. Pretty much every Greek thing will either be masculine, feminine, or singular, or neuter. In this case, and this doesn't really change anything dramatically, it's just to me it's kind of interesting. In this case, the one body is neuter, which you would say is logical, because we're both, but the word there is neuter. One Spirit is neuter. You might expect this masculine, but it's not, it's neuter. Then you've got one hope. Then you might think that's neuter, but it's actually feminine. I don't know what this says about the way the Greeks viewed these different aspects. It's just the way the language developed. One Lord is referring to Jesus. That is masculine. One faith, the faith there is feminine. One baptism is neuter. One God and Father of all is masculine. Now, I know this isn't a big thing, but I remember years ago, Dee may well remember this, I was preaching in Greerton, and I accidentally called God she. And there was a bit of a surprise in the audience. I didn't even notice I'd said it. And Dee approached me afterwards and said, "Did you realise you called God she?" "Oh, yeah, I'm sorry." And I said to everyone, "No, God's not a she, he's a he." And that didn't go down very well either, actually. But in fact, when you look at the way God is referred to in the New Testament, it is always in the masculine. Well, whatever that means. There is a certain amount of pressure in the religious world in general to make God a she. Just as there is a lot of pressure to, in a sense, give more respect to women, which I totally believe in. But one of the ways they do it is try to go too far in the other direction. And quite often you'll be watching a movie and there's a goddess, or God is referred to as she. When it comes to the only authoritative document we have about the nature of God, God is in the masculine. I hesitate to call him a man because he's obviously different from us altogether. But he is absolutely in the masculine form. So we can't refer to him as she. Or in any way try and make out there is a goddess or anything like that. Okay. Now if we look at this passage again, verse 3, being eager to keep the unity of the Spirit and the bond of peace. There's a number of things there. The bond of peace. What we're trying to accomplish within our congregation is peace among the members. Peace means we are not at war with each other. We may have some disagreements, but we're able to resolve them in a peaceful way. Unfortunately, and very often, that simply does not happen. I don't know why. Maybe it's because we're human. But I've been in a number of situations where religious differences end up with people really fighting and disliking each other. You can only say that that is worldliness. If we've tried to resolve a problem by bullying each other or calling each other names or any other way than something that will result in a peaceful outcome, we are in the wrong. And to me, this also means, especially keeping the unity of the Spirit and the bond of peace, every way which we react to each other should be trying to produce a peaceful and a unified outcome in those relationships. Now, I know that people don't always do what they should do. And very often it's easy for us to say, well, he's not a good Christian because he did this. You know, I don't respect him anymore because he did this. There's an expression you quite often hear, not so much now, but a few years ago it was very common. Are you part of the problem or are you part of the solution? Just because someone else isn't doing what they should do doesn't mean we can't help that person do what is right. If we react and do what's wrong as well, we are not part of the solution. We are not promoting peace. We are promoting division and discord. And that's what this passage is trying to convince us absolutely not to do. We are all different people. We all have different backgrounds. We all have different education. We all have different likes and dislikes. And when you put that together into a group, very often you'll get strife and discord. As Christians, we need to live above that. We need to use the resources God has given us to actually be able to live together as a loving unit in spite of the fact that we are all different. And if we do that, I believe we've done something very, very valuable, and especially very, very valuable to God. But notice that second word in verse 3, being eager. In other words, this should be in a sense, an all-consuming desire that we have in our relationships with one another. We should never feel like we have the excuse to have a go at somebody simply because he was misbehaving or doing what was wrong. We should always be trying to resolve the situation in a peaceful way so we can go on as a loving congregation. And I believe we've overlooked that aspect of our Christianity to a fair extent in the church. But I do believe it's tremendously, tremendously important if the church really is to survive in the longer term. Eager, I've just got a note on the meaning of eager, and this particular word, spudadzo. Someone's attacking a spud with an adze. Spudadzo, that's the way it's pronounced. To do something with intense effort and motivation. That's the original meaning of that word. The desire to try and sort out problems and resolve conflict should be something that we put an intense amount of effort into. And to me, that really implies those conditions will exist within us. If it's emphasized, it means it's going to happen. But we need to be ready for it happening, and we need to have the resources to resolve those problems. I think a skill would be good for someone in the church to have is conflict resolution. You know, conflict resolution is a whole study in itself. I'm not sure whether you can actually do degrees in conflict resolution, but it will come up in a lot of degree programs that you do. Someone who's able to do that effectively is a very valuable member of the congregation. Now, so we've got to eagerly try to be unified. Now I want to extend that a bit beyond just the immediate congregation to the wider Christian world. There are a number of methods used to try and achieve this. One is to have a central figure that is the boss of everyone, all around the world, in your organization. He gives the rules. He tells you what you need to do. He organizes the discipline. If you don't do what he says you should do, can work in terms of unity, can result in unity. Another one is to have a head office which somehow makes the rules, which guides all the rest. And there are various methods that are used to achieve unity. What I want to look at is what's called the ecumenical movement. One of the big movements that exists in Christianity or in general today is something called the ecumenical movement. The ecumenical movement is a system whereby Christians base unity on, if you like, similarities rather than differences. So you've got one group, got one particular organization, one group's got another particular organization. Both groups have different beliefs in some areas. But the ecumenical movement will say we can all be one because of the things that unite us. In other words, we all believe in Jesus as the Christ. We all believe in God the Father. We all believe in heaven. And there may well be some other things. So they concentrate on what we mutually believe is true and really forget about the differences that divide them. Some will have one way of becoming a Christian, some will have another way of becoming a Christian. Some will have an organisation whereby you've got a head office in the world, and then you've got other head offices for each country. Others won't have that system. But the ecumenical movement say we can all be one because of these things that actually unite us. And we'll forget about the differences that we have. And I put i.e., well, I'll read what I've written here. A system of Christian unity whereby groups are accepted based on similarities of belief rather than excluded based on differences. I.e., let all just be free to believe what we want and accept each other because we call ourselves Christians. That's a very, very common movement in the Christian world. Possibly one of the biggest. You know, you've got the World Ecumenical Council, you've got New Zealand Ecumenical Council, various things. What I want to look at now is, does the Bible back that position up? And that's really the important thing. If the ecumenical movement is correct, does the Bible back it up? Can we prove from the Bible that that is what God wanted from his people? We know he wants unity. What he would want is for every group that calls themselves Christians to be united and treat each other as fellow Christians. In practice, we don't, because of all the different groups, different ways of doing things. Are we wrong to not accept other congregations as also Christian? And listen to what I've got to say before you make up your mind, whether I'm a heretic or whatever. Okay, first one I want to look at in terms of what passages that seem to relate in some way to this position is Galatians chapter 1, 6 through 10. And most of these passages you'll be very familiar with. I'm astonished that you are turning away so quickly from the one who called you by the grace of Christ to a different gospel. Not that there is a different meaning other gospel, except there are some who are disturbing you and wanting to distort the gospel of Christ. So what Paul is addressing here is the tendency of especially the Judaizing Christians who wanted to include circumcision. That was the big problem of the day. If you want to be a Christian and you're not circumcised, you need to get circumcised. He doesn't say he is referring to circumcision. So this is a general principle. The problem they faced with circumcision and other things from the Jewish system. But he doesn't mention any of them because this is a general principle we need to follow. Verse 8, but even if we or an angel from heaven should proclaim a gospel to you contrary to what we proclaim to you, let him be accursed. So according to this, if we distort the gospel by changing it in any way, and that's the implication of this, then actually it is no longer the gospel which God provides us. It's no longer the basis for our possibility of salvation before God. Because it is a different good news. It's not the good news that was originally given, which Jesus gave us, Paul gave us. It is a different good news. And then he said, whoever wants to change it. I think if an angel appeared before me, I'd be pretty prone to listen to what he said. Angels are certainly above us. You would perceive them as having more authority than us. But even if an angel told us something different from what we received in the Bible, that angel would be accursed. He is not acting from God. In verse 9, as we said before, and so now I say again, if anyone is proclaiming a gospel to you contrary to what we have received, let him be accursed. Again, he emphasizes it twice. Pretty much every time you say something twice, you really want the person to get what you're saying. Maybe I asked Sam one time, I don't know, would you go to the shop and buy such and such? And he didn't really seem to be listening too much, and he's got his earphones on, and whatever. And I said, Sam, now make sure you get this particular thing, because that's what I want. I've said it twice because I really want to make sure he knows. That's exactly what Paul is doing for us here. He is driving it home that this is absolutely important as far as our faith before God is concerned. And then verse 10, for am I now making an appeal to people or to God? I think what he's meaning here is the popularity of people. If popularity was important, then if we did these other things that these other groups do that make progress in terms of numbers, if that's the criteria we need when it comes to doing what is right in our worship, etc., then sure, let's do it. But what Paul is saying, that is not the criteria for what's important as far as our relationship with God. Or am I now appealing to people or to God? I think it sometimes does separate us. It does make us, to some extent, unpopular when we truly stand for what the Bible actually says. And I'm sure we've all experienced this in our Christian life. We're not going to be loved by everyone. But in the end, what is important? It's following the gospel which God gave us, not what man thinks is a good idea. He says, or am I seeking to please people? If we wanted to please people as a group, we should bring in a band. Man, that would really please. You'll see what happens with groups, even pretty close to the church. They bring in a band and the numbers go up very, very fast. But pleasing people is not what's important. It's doing what is right before God. And changing the gospel to suit ourselves is not what is right. If we were still trying to please people, I would not be a slave of Christ. If I turn around and do things just to become popular or just to build the church but not do it the right way, Paul said, I'm no longer a slave of Christ. Okay. I better keep going. I'm going to run out of time. Matthew 15, 8 through 10. And again, we're looking at, does the Bible support the concepts of the ecumenical movement? Matthew 15, 8 through 10. This people honour me with their lips, but their heart is far, far away from me. They worship me in vain, teaching as doctrines the commandments of men. If we change anything that the gospel teaches, then what we are doing is teaching the commandments of men, not the commandments of God. No matter how logical or how useful that change might be, if we say you must do this to be right with God, then we are teaching the commandments of man, not God. Notice he says in verse 9, they worship me in vain. In other words, their worship, not that the worship itself is wrong, but it is a waste of time. If we're going to follow human doctrines, our gathering together on Sunday to worship God is a complete waste of time. That's what this passage is saying. Okay, 2 John 9 and verse 11. Everyone who goes too far and does not remain in the teachings of Christ does not have God. Now again, going too far could have a number of meanings. May well include introducing your own laws. There are, if you like, teachings which the Bible is telling us we should do, and we figured out if we include these other laws, we can more effectively make sure that's happened. This was what the Jews called putting a fence around the law. Normally, the councils will make you put fence around a swimming pool. And other difficult situations. If you've got a balcony, you've got to have a proper, whatever the thing around it is called. So that you won't accidentally fall over the balcony. Or a swimming pool, you won't accidentally fall into the swimming pool and drown. That's called putting a fence around a problem. Sometimes we do the same thing as far as Christian laws are concerned. Okay, let's give an example. I can get myself into trouble dealing with these, but still I'm going to go ahead. I'm not very well paid from outside, so I won't risk my support. We're told we are not to be immodest. Or another passage kind of talks about lasciviousness. Some dancing is immodest. I've seen dancing on the TV which you cannot categorise anything but immodest. And the idea has developed that because dancing can be immodest, that all dancing is immodest. Therefore, it is wrong for us to be involved in any sort of dancing whatsoever. That's what the Jews would call putting a fence around the law to protect the people from the sin of being immodest. To me, that's exactly, or very strongly, what is being talked about here. Anyone who goes too far, in other words, we're going beyond the original law and bringing in other laws, if you like, to protect that original law. But in doing that, we've created our own laws, and we have gone too far.
Jews are famous for that, aren't they?
Do we have the right to make our own laws before God? Do we have the right to make our own laws? Absolutely not. We can decide for ourselves that we're going to do something or not do something based on our belief and our faith. But unless we can show very clearly in the Word, we cannot bind that on anyone else. I decided early on that I wasn't going to drink alcohol. Originally it was because I thought it was wrong. First off, I thought it wasn't wrong. Then I decided it was wrong. And then the more I studied the Bible, I just came to the conclusion, absolutely, it's actually not wrong. I don't say it may be a good idea. It may not be the best thing for me to do. But I can't see I'm sinning by doing it. But because I can't find a passage in the Bible that says it's wrong to have alcohol. Timothy was actually encouraged to drink alcohol by the way. Jesus probably drank alcohol. Turned water into wine. The word there pretty much means alcohol. Okay, but if we say because it's possible for someone to get drunk by drinking wine, therefore absolutely we must never drink wine so that that possibility will never happen. That's what's happening. Anyone who goes too far and does not remain in the teachings. With alcohol, the teaching is don't get drunk. Absolutely, drunkenness is wrong. We can prove that from the scriptures very easily. But to go beyond that, we are making our own laws and binding them on other people. Okay, the one who remains in the teachings, this person has both the Father and the Son. If anyone comes to you and does not bring this teaching, do not receive him into your house, and do not speak a greeting to him. Pretty strong words. Someone who is bringing a teaching, and that's what's being concentrated on, not whether the person is loving or not whether the person does good works or not. That's not under consideration here. It's important in other passages, but not this passage. The concentration here is on the teaching. If anyone comes to you and does not bring this teaching, do not receive him into your house, and do not speak a greeting to them. In other words, I don't believe it's talking about non-Christians. He's talking about Christians. If a person is wanting to teach something different from what the Bible teaches, in fact, this is saying we are not to treat him as a faithful brother or sister. I think we can have differences of opinions on some areas, but it's another thing to get up and preach them as truth. That's when it becomes a problem. And in verse 11, because the one who speaks a greeting to him shares in his evil deeds. So when we support someone who's doing such a thing, in this case by greeting him, by treating him as faithful, he says we're just as guilty of what he is doing as if we did it ourselves. That's really what it's saying. Last one in this section, Jude 3. Dear friends, although I was making every effort to write to you concerning our common salvation, I consider it a necessity to write to you to encourage you to contend for the faith delivered once for all to the saints. The original message was never intended to be changed in any way as far as God is concerned. So the point is, do these passages support the concept of the ecumenical unity or not? And I've got to say, absolutely, they do not. What they support is people who are devoted to what the Bible teaches and actually don't have fellowship with those who hold a view that is not from the Bible. That's what the Bible supports. That's what we've seen in the passages. Okay, so we want to be united, but the big question is, who is the one body? That's the problem. Sometimes we say the ones that's called the Church of Christ. But that's not true either. There's a lot of churches of Christ who actually teach very different to what we teach. Very different from what the Bible teaches. They still call themselves the Church of Christ. That's not universally the flagpole to who's the correct church, who's the one body. In fact, I think I've brought this up before, the Church of Christ, the term Church of Christ is only actually used once in the Bible. The Church of God is used way more often. It's actually used, I think, about 7 times. Just the church is used very regularly. And there's other terms used to describe the church. In the end, it's only a descriptive term. I think it's an extremely valid one. I'm not saying we shouldn't use it by any means. But if a group chooses to call themselves the Church of God, they're not wrong because of that. Okay, so who is the church that, when it comes to being united, who is those other groups, if you like, that we can unite with and treat as brethren? From the passage we were looking, groups that remain in the teachings of Christ. Whether they call themselves Church of Christ, Church of God, the Church in Corinth, Church in Ephesus, whatever they call themselves. If they remain in the teachings, that's the point we need to consider important. They don't have to appear in the book where the churches meet. They may not be in there. Whoever produced that book may not have knowledge of them. Groups that do not introduce man-made teachings. I think that's a big one. If we introduce man-made teachings, we are elevating ourselves above God. We are saying we are the lawmakers. We have greater authority to make laws than God does. And groups that do not change the gospel from its original form, the faith once and for all delivered unto the saints. Once we get away from that, we are not following God. So, kind of in summary, we've got a lot more we're going to look at next week, but we'll finish off here. Who is the one body? Groups that teach differently from the New Testament teaching are not the one body. That's just all there is to it. Groups that teach what the New Testament teaches are part of that one body. If we've changed the teaching, and Galatians 1, 6 through 10 would indicate in any way, we are no longer serving God, since we are serving man. Okay, going to finish there. As you can see, we've got quite a bit more to go through. I kind of wonder at times whether I've only got through about 2 verses, whether that's a bad thing. But in fact, each time, even though it's taken a while to get through Ephesians, we're bringing up a lot of different subjects, and I think that's a very useful thing to do. So, what I'm trying to do is look at a paragraph at a time, because a paragraph is one idea kind of developed. But as you can see, I sometimes take more than one lesson to get through that one paragraph. So